Story 1. Henry Lee Hunt was born on November 22, 1944. He was born in Robeson County, North Carolina. His family belonged to the Lumbee tribe of Native Americans. Robeson County was a poor area. Many Lumbee people lived there. Henry's childhood was not easy. His family did not have much money. The home where he grew up was often violent. There were fights and shouting. Henry saw anger and aggression from a young age. This made him behave in rough ways as he got older. He went to school in Robeson County, but he did not stay in school for a long time. He left school early. He never got a good education. After leaving school, he started doing small jobs. He worked as a roofer. Roofing was hard physical work. He would climb on houses and fix or put on new roofs. This job paid him money, but he did not always stay at one job for a long time. Henry had a temper. People who knew him said he could be mean. He got into trouble with the law when he was still a young man. His criminal record started early. He was involved in several armed robberies. Armed robbery means he took money or things from people while using a weapon. He did this more than once. One very strange thing Henry did was blow up his mother's house. He used some kind of explosive to destroy the house where his mother lived. This was a violent and dangerous act. The police arrested him for this. He went to prison for that crime. Being in prison did not calm him down. When he got out, he continued to have a bad reputation. Henry had a girlfriend named Bernice Cummings. She lived with him in his trailer at one point. They spent time together drinking beer and relaxing after work. Henry liked to drink alcohol. He also had a son named Donald Ray. He had other family members too. His brother was R.D. Hunt. He had a sister named Aganora. Another sister was Annie Ruth Wassell. His family stayed in touch with him over the years. Henry was known in Robeson County as a dangerous person. People were afraid of him. He had a way of making others do what he wanted. Some people said he held power over a part of the community. They would not talk to the police about him because they were scared. He was a suspect in another murder case before the events that would later send him to death row. But at this time in his life, he had not yet been convicted of killing anyone. He lived in a trailer. He owned a gun. He moved around the county and knew many people. Some of those people were also involved in crimes. One of them was Elwell Barnes, who was also called Babe. Another was A.R. Barnes. Henry would meet with them from time to time. His life was not steady. He did not have a regular routine. He went from job to job and from trouble to trouble. By the middle of 1984, Henry Lee Hunt was 39 years old. He had been in prison before. He had a violent past. He had a girlfriend. He had family. He worked as a roofer when he could. But he was also known as a man who could hurt others without feeling bad about it. People in Robeson County knew his name, and many of them were afraid of him. In July 1984, a woman named Dottie Ransom started thinking about money. She was married to Jackie Ray Ransom, but she was also still married to another man named Rogers Locklear. Locklear worked construction and was away from home for many days at a time. While Locklear was gone, Dottie began seeing Jackie Ransom. She later married Jackie, even though she never divorced Locklear. This meant she had two husbands at the same time. Dottie wanted a new trailer and a cafe. She did not have enough money for these things. So she asked Locklear about getting life insurance on Jackie Ransom. She said they could kill Jackie and then collect the money. Locklear agreed to help her. On August 3, 1984, Dottie bought a $25,000 life insurance policy on Jackie Ransom. She even asked the insurance agent if she would get double the money if Jackie died in a fight. She was already planning his death. Dottie told Locklear to find someone who would kill Jackie for money. Locklear first asked his brother Harry to run over Jackie with a car. Harry said no, but Harry told Locklear to see a man named A.R. Barnes. A.R. Barnes was known as someone who could do violent jobs for cash. On August 16, 1984, Locklear met A.R. Barnes. They talked. Locklear agreed to pay $2,000 to have Jackie Ransom killed. A.R. Barnes said, "If I don't kill him, I'll get it done." Locklear and A.R. met several more times after that. Then on September 8, 1984, Locklear went to A.R. Barnes's house. He wanted to know if A.R. was going to kill Jackie, but Locklear did not see A.R. Instead, he saw A.R.'s brother, Elwell Barnes. People called Elwell Babe. Elwell asked Locklear if he could take his brother's place. Elwell said he would kill Jackie for the same $2,000. Locklear said that was fine with him. Elwell Barnes then told Locklear to drive him to Henry Lee Hunt's trailer. When they arrived, Elwell went inside and talked with Henry alone for about 10 minutes. After that, Henry came out and got into Locklear's car. Henry put his hand on his pocket and said, "I got the gun. Me and Babe can get the job done." Elwell nodded and said, "Yeah." Locklear drove the car. Henry told him where to go. They drove past a house, and Henry looked at it. He said, "That looks like where Jackie stay there." Then they drove down a road into some woods. Henry got out and hid the gun in some bushes. They drove back into town. Locklear pointed out Jackie Ransom on the street. Henry looked at him. Then Henry told Locklear to take his wife Dottie to a place where people could see her. That way, she would have witnesses to say she was not near the murder. Later that night, around 11 o'clock or 11:30, Henry and Elwell Barnes went back to Henry's trailer. Henry took off his clothes and put them in the washing machine. He put a pistol under his mattress. Elwell slept on the couch. The next morning, Henry's girlfriend Bernice Cummings asked Elwell where they had been. Elwell said they had killed Jackie Ransom for $2,000 for Dottie and Rogers Locklear. Bernice asked who shot Jackie. Elwell said, "Henry Lee Hunt." That same day, Locklear drove to Henry's trailer. Henry walked up to him and said, "I killed Jackie last night." Then Henry said he wanted his $2,000 in 30 days. If he did not get the money, he would kill Dottie and Locklear too. Later that day, September 9th, 1984, Jackie Ransom's body was found in a shallow grave in the woods off Elm Street in Lumberton. He had been shot in the head. The next day, September 10th, 1984, Henry was at his trailer with Elwell Barnes. A man named Buddy Roe Barton drove up. Henry went to Barton's car and talked to him. When Henry came back, he was angry. He said a man named Larry Jones was running his mouth. Larry Jones lived with Henry's sister, Aganora. Larry had been talking to police detectives about Jackie Ransom's death. Henry said he would put a stop to his damn mouth. Larry Jones was a police informant. That meant he told the police things he knew about crimes. Henry knew that if Larry kept talking, the police would come after Henry. So Henry decided to kill Larry. On September 14th, 1984, Henry told Bernice Cummings that he was going to kill Larry Jones. He called Larry a water-headed, ratting son of a bitch. He said he wanted to get a shovel so he could bury Larry where no one would ever find him. Henry said Larry had been running his mouth and knew that Henry had killed Jackie Ransom. Henry went to a man named Mitt Jones and borrowed a shovel. He put the shovel in the trunk of a car. He also got a shotgun and put it in the trunk of Bernice's car. Henry told his sister Aganora and Bernice that he was going to kill Larry because Larry could get Henry a life sentence in prison. Later that day, Henry and Elwell Barnes got into a car driven by a man named Jerome Ratley. They picked up Larry Jones. They drove to a person's house called String Bean. Then they left that place and kept driving. Henry told Ratley to turn onto a dirt road, then onto a tram road. Then Henry told Ratley to stop the car and turn off the lights. Henry turned around in his seat. He shot Larry Jones in the chest with a pistol. Jerome Ratley saw 2 or 3 shots. Then Henry said to Larry, "You don't eat no more cheese for no damn body else. I'll meet you in heaven or hell one." Henry pulled Larry's body out of the car. Elwell Barnes got the shotgun from the trunk. Larry was still alive and mumbled, "Mule, mule." Mule was another name for Henry. Elwell pointed the shotgun at Larry's head. Henry said, "Don't shoot him with the shotgun." Then Henry shot Larry several more times with the pistol. Elwell Barnes stood watch to make sure no one was coming. Henry and Jerome Ratley dragged Larry's body about 100 yards into the woods. They buried him in a shallow grave. As they drove back into town, Elwell said, "That man was about to cause me to pull a life sentence." He meant that Larry almost got him sent to prison for life. The next morning, September 15th, 1984, Henry told Bernice Cummings that he had taken Larry Jones to where he would never be found. On October 1st, 1984, the body of Larry Jones was found in the shallow grave near Fairmont. He had been shot multiple times. The police and the State Bureau of Investigation started looking for answers. They already had Jackie Ransom's body from September 9th. Now they had two dead men. Both were shot with a handgun. Detective Mike Stogner from the Lumberton Police Department and SBI agent Lee Sampson began talking to people. They learned that Larry Jones had been talking to them about Jackie Ransom's death. They also learned that Henry Lee Hunt was angry at Larry. Witnesses started to come forward. One witness was Bernice Cummings, Henry's girlfriend. She told the police what Henry had said to her. She told them about the shovel and the shotgun. She told them that Elwell Barnes said Henry shot Jackie Ransom. Another witness was Jerome Ratley. He had been driving the car when Larry Jones was killed. Ratley saw Henry shoot Larry. He helped drag the body into the woods. Ratley was not charged with any crime because he agreed to testify against Henry. The police also found the gun. Henry had given a .25 caliber Beretta pistol to his son-in-law after the murders. Henry told his son-in-law that he had killed Jackie and Larry. He also told his son-in-law to get rid of the gun. And he told him to get his brother to get rid of the black guy, meaning Jerome Ratley, because Ratley was the one who could hurt Henry the most. The son-in-law later gave the gun to the police. A ballistics expert tested bullets from Jackie Ransom's body and Larry Jones's body. The bullets matched the Beretta. The police arrested Henry Lee Hunt. They also arrested Elwell Barnes and A.R. Barnes. Henry was charged with 2 counts of first-degree murder and 2 counts of conspiracy to commit murder. The trial started in November 1985 in Robeson County Superior Court. The judge was Giles R. Clark. The prosecutor was Joe Freeman Britt. The trial was long. Many witnesses testified. Bernice Cummings told the jury what Henry had said. Jerome Ratley told them he saw Henry shoot Larry Jones. Rogers Locklear told them about hiring Elwell and Henry to kill Jackie. The ballistics expert said the bullets came from Henry's gun. Henry's lawyers did not present much evidence to show he was innocent. They were afraid that telling the jury more about Henry's criminal past would make things worse. So they did not bring up the violent childhood or mental problems. They also did not show that dirt on a shovel did not match the grave soil. The jury never heard that. On December 20th, 1985, the jury found Henry Lee Hunt guilty of both murders and both conspiracy charges. Then the same jury had to decide if Henry would get life in prison or the death penalty. The jury found 2 aggravating factors for Jackie Ransom's murder. Henry had a past felony with violence, and he killed for money. For Larry Jones's murder, the jury found that Henry had a past felony with violence and that he killed to avoid arrest. The jury recommended death for each murder. The judge sentenced Henry to death. He also gave Henry 2 10-year sentences for the conspiracy charges. Other people were also punished. Elwell Barnes was convicted and also sentenced to death. Later his sentence was changed to life in prison. He died of natural causes in prison on September 19, 1991. A.R. Barnes pleaded guilty to a lesser charge of conspiracy. He served 7 years and 8 months in prison. Rogers Locklear pleaded guilty to conspiracy. Dottie Ransom also pleaded guilty to conspiracy. She was the only one still alive at the time of Henry's execution. Henry did not give up. He appealed his case many times. He said he was innocent. He said his lawyers did a bad job. He said the indictments were wrong. He passed 2 polygraph tests while in prison. In 1999, an affidavit appeared. It was signed by Elwell Barnes and dated 1989. In it, Elwell said he committed the murders alone, and Henry had nothing to do with them. But Elwell could not read or write. The courts said the affidavit was not believable. They refused to hold a new hearing. The police and the SBI destroyed some of their case files. Henry's lawyers said that destroyed evidence could have helped Henry. But the courts still did not change the verdict. Henry's execution was first set for January 2003. But the state Supreme Court stopped it because they needed to decide if the indictment form was legal. In July 2003, the court said the form was legal. The state set a new execution date, September 12, 2003. In the days before the execution, Henry's lawyers tried one more time. They argued that North Carolina used 3 drugs for lethal injection: a sleeping drug, a paralytic, and a heart-stopping drug. They said the law only allowed 2 drugs. A judge agreed and issued a stay on September 9th. But the state Supreme Court overturned that stay on September 11th. The U.S. Supreme Court also rejected Henry's appeals. Governor Mike Easley refused to grant clemency. He said he found no reason to change the jury's decision. On September 12, 2003, at Central Prison in Raleigh, Henry Lee Hunt was taken to the death chamber. He was 58 years old. He had eaten his final meal, a medium Domino's pizza with pepperoni, hamburger, Canadian bacon, sausage, onions, mushrooms, and green peppers, and a 20-ounce Coke. He looked at his family through a window. He winked at them. He said, "It's a good day to die." At 2:01 a.m., the drugs began to flow. At 2:17 a.m., he was pronounced dead. He was the first Native American executed in North Carolina since the death penalty was brought back in 1977. Henry Lee Hunt died insisting he was innocent, but the state said justice had been done. Story 2. Joseph Earl Bates was born on May 1, 1968. He was a white male. He grew up in Yadkin County, North Carolina. This is a rural area in the western part of the state. Joseph had a sister named Tricia Bullens. His family was not wealthy, but they lived a normal life. As a child, Joseph did well in school. He worked hard on his studies. He also played football. He was an active and energetic boy. People who knew Joseph as a young person said he was kind. He did not cause serious trouble. He seemed like a normal teenager who got along with others. When Joseph finished school, he started working. He found a job with a man named Hal Edelman. Edelman was his employer. Joseph worked for Edelman for some time. In 1987, when Joseph was 19 years old, something changed his life. He was in a serious car accident. The accident hurt his head. It caused damage to his brain. Before the accident, Joseph already had a learning problem. Doctors said he was borderline mentally retarded. That meant his ability to think, learn, and make decisions was lower than most people's. He was not able to process information as quickly or as well as others. After the car accident, his personality began to change. People who knew him noticed that he was not the same. He became more anxious. He also became more suspicious of other people. He had trouble controlling his emotions. Joseph also got married around this time. His wife's name was Lisa Bates. They lived together in Yadkin County. But the marriage did not last. They separated. Lisa later had a new boyfriend named Jeff Goins. This made Joseph upset. In late July or early August 1990, something happened at Joseph's house. Someone broke into his home. That same person fired gunshots into the house. No one was hurt, but Joseph was very scared and angry. He did not know who did it. Because he was afraid to stay in his house, Joseph moved to a temporary campsite. He set up a tent on Hal Edelman's property. Edelman allowed him to stay there. Joseph slept in the tent, and kept his things there. Around this same time, Joseph told a friend of his, Gary Shaver, something strange. He said that he thought he could kill someone. He did not say who or why. He just made the statement. Gary Shaver did not know if Joseph was serious or not. That was the state of Joseph Bates's life in the summer of 1990. He was 22 years old. He had brain damage from a car accident. He had trouble thinking clearly. He was worried about who had shot at his house. He was upset about his ex-wife and her new boyfriend. He was living in a tent, and he had spoken about killing someone. On August 10th, 1990, Joseph Bates called his employer, Hal Edelman. Joseph told Edelman to meet him at a bridge later that evening. Joseph said something was going down. Edelman went to the bridge as Joseph asked. He waited for 2.5 hours, but Joseph never showed up. Edelman went home and went to bed. The next evening, August 11th, 1990, Joseph and his friend Gary Shaver went to a nightclub called Layden's. The club was in Yadkin County. They arrived around 9 o'clock or 9:30 p.m. Also at the club that night were Billy Grimes and his girlfriend Jeanette Turner. Billy Grimes was another friend of Joseph's. Jeanette Turner worked as a waitress at Layden's. Billy Grimes left the club around 12:30 or 1 a.m. He and Jeanette planned to meet later at a place called Brand's Game Room. At about 1:45 a.m., Joseph spoke to Jeanette Turner. He asked her to tell Billy Grimes to telephone Hal Edelman. Joseph said that Grimes and Edelman would know what was going on. Jeanette did not understand what Joseph meant, but she agreed to pass along the message. Jeanette left Layden's around 2 o'clock or 2:30 a.m. She went to Brand's Game Room and found Billy Grimes. She told him what Joseph had said. Grimes did not know what Joseph was talking about either, but he went to a pay phone outside a restaurant and called Edelman. Grimes woke Edelman up. He told Edelman that Joseph said something was going down and asked if Edelman wanted anything to do with it. Edelman said no. He had waited at the bridge the night before and nothing happened. Edelman went back to sleep. Meanwhile, back at Layden's nightclub, a man named Charles Edwin Jenkins was there. He was a white male. No one knows exactly how old he was. He had been drinking at the club. Around 2 a.m., Charles asked Joseph and Gary Shaver for a ride home. Joseph agreed to give him a ride. The three men got into Joseph's vehicle. Joseph was driving. Gary Shaver sat in the passenger seat. Charles Jenkins sat in the back. During the drive, Joseph asked Charles a question. He asked if Charles knew Joseph's ex-wife Lisa Bates and her new boyfriend Jeff Goins. Charles said yes. He described Lisa as having long blonde hair and big breasts. Gary Shaver later said that Lisa did have long blonde hair, but she did not have big breasts. This made Joseph suspicious. Joseph stopped the vehicle 2 times. The first time, he stopped on the side of the road in Iredell County. He said he and Gary needed to use the bathroom. Charles stayed in the vehicle. They stopped for about 15 to 20 minutes. Then Joseph started driving again. After driving another 15 or 20 minutes, Joseph stopped a second time. This time, Charles and Gary both got out to use the bathroom. Gary stood on the passenger side of the vehicle. Charles stood at the back of the vehicle. Joseph got out of the driver's seat. He walked to the back of the vehicle. Inside the vehicle, he had a shovel handle. He picked it up. Then he struck Charles Jenkins on the back of the head with the shovel handle. He hit him at least 3 times. Charles fell to the ground. He appeared to be unconscious. Joseph then took some rope from his vehicle. He tied Charles's hands together. While Joseph was doing this, Charles started to moan. He was not fully unconscious. Joseph told Gary to hit Charles with the shovel handle. Gary refused. So Joseph took the handle again and struck Charles on the back of the head 1 more time. Charles stopped moaning and appeared to be unconscious again. Joseph then tied Charles's arms and legs behind his back. This is called hog tying. Charles could not move his arms or legs. He was completely bound. Joseph asked Gary to help him lift Charles, and put him back into the vehicle. Gary helped. They placed Charles on the floor in the back of the vehicle. He was still hogtied. Joseph told Gary that he believed Charles was one of the people who had been messing around his house and shooting into it. Joseph said he was going to find out some answers. He thought Charles was setting him up and leading him into a trap. Joseph believed that the people who shot into his house were friends of his ex-wife and her boyfriend. Joseph started driving toward his campsite on Hal Edelman's property. Gary sat in the passenger seat. Charles lay hogtied on the floor in the back. At some point, Charles lifted his head. He asked Joseph what he had done and what was going on. He also said he could not see because his glasses had been lost. Joseph told him to shut up. On the way to the campsite, Joseph stopped at Hal Edelman's house. It was late at night or early in the morning. Joseph and Gary got out. Joseph knocked on Edelman's door and went inside. Gary waited outside by the vehicle. Joseph told Edelman, "We got one of the MFs." Edelman asked who it was. Joseph said the man's name was Chuck. Edelman asked how Joseph knew he was one of them. Joseph said, "He's told us." Edelman asked where the man was. Joseph said, "He's hogtied in the Jeep. You want to see him?" Edelman said no. He told Joseph the best thing to do was take the man back, apologize, and hope he did not press charges for kidnapping. Joseph and Edelman walked outside onto the porch. While they were talking, Billy Grimes drove up in his pickup truck. He parked behind Joseph's vehicle. Joseph walked over to Grimes's truck. He said to Grimes, "I've got one of the guys that's been messing with me. Do you want to watch or help?" Grimes said no. He got back in his truck and drove home. Edelman talked to Gary Shaver. Edelman told Gary he did not want anything to do with this either. Edelman told Gary to talk to Joseph. Then Edelman said to Joseph, "You better listen." Joseph walked over to Gary. He told Gary that he could get out of the situation if he wanted. Gary said he wanted out. He had sole custody of his young daughter. He did not want to lose her. Joseph agreed to take Gary back to his vehicle, which was parked at the campsite. Joseph and Gary got back into the vehicle. Charles was still hog-tied on the floor in the back. Joseph drove to the campsite. When they arrived, Gary got into his own vehicle. Charles was still alive at this time. Gary drove home. He set his alarm clock and went to bed. The time was approximately 4 a.m. Joseph was now alone with Charles Jenkins at the campsite. Joseph loosened the ropes on Charles. He began asking Charles who had shot into his house. Charles named 2 people who were involved, but Charles did not say anything else. Joseph was not satisfied with the answer. Joseph then tied Charles to a tree. He went into his tent. Inside the tent, he had a gun. He had borrowed this gun from Hal Edelman earlier. Joseph took the gun out of the tent. He put the gun up against Charles's throat. Charles repeated that he did not know for sure who had shot into Joseph's house. Joseph then untied Charles from the tree. He took Charles to the back of the truck. Charles was lying face up near the back of the truck. Joseph pointed the gun at Charles's neck. He pulled the trigger and shot him. After shooting Charles, Joseph went through Charles's pockets. He took anything he found. Then he tied Charles's hands and feet again. He loaded Charles's body back into the Jeep. Joseph drove back to Hal Edelman's house. It was still dark outside. He knocked on the door and woke Edelman up again. Joseph returned the gun he had borrowed. Edelman took the gun and placed it in a bedroom. Then Joseph asked Edelman a question. "What do you think I should do with the body?" Edelman asked Joseph to repeat the question. Joseph did. Edelman said that if Joseph had a body, he had only 3 choices. He could take the body to the sheriff's office, bury it, or throw it in the river. Joseph then asked, "Do you reckon I should tie cement blocks to him?" Edelman said that if Joseph did or did not, the body would come up in 9 to 11 days anyway. Joseph said, "I guess I can load him by myself," and he left. Later that morning, Edelman looked at the gun. He found what appeared to be flesh and blood on it. He cleaned the gun. That same day, Joseph returned to Edelman's house. They spoke. Joseph said, "Well, it don't bother me all that bad." Edelman said, "It will." Joseph then packed up his tent and left the campsite. Around noon that day, Billy Grimes saw Joseph at Joseph's house. Joseph was unloading his vehicle. He had his tent and other items from the campsite. Grimes saw blood all over the contents of the vehicle. Joseph took some items inside his house and washed the blood off in the sink. Later that day, Grimes saw Joseph again at Brand's game room. Joseph told Grimes that he shot Charles through the neck and threw his body into the river. Grimes asked Joseph why he killed Charles. Joseph said he could not let Charles live after what he had done to him. He also said that he would get just as much time for murder as he would for kidnapping. A couple of days later, Gary Shaver saw Joseph at Edelman's house. Gary asked Joseph what happened. Joseph said it was best if Gary did not know. On August 25, 1990, two fishermen were on the Yadkin River in Yadkin County. They saw a body floating in the water. They contacted the police. The body was Charles Edwin Jenkins. His ankles and wrists were tied with rope. His arms and legs were pulled behind his back and tied together in a hog tie. A rope was tied around his neck. His belt buckle was undone. His pants were unzipped. His body had begun to decompose. On August 26, 1990, the day after the body was found, a medical examiner performed an autopsy on Charles Jenkins. The examiner saw that the wrists and ankles had been tied with rope. The arms and legs had been fastened behind the back in a hog tie. There was also a rope loop around the neck and a separate rope around the knee area. The body was badly decomposed. The examiner found a gunshot wound at the back of the neck. The examiner could not say for certain whether Charles felt pain from the gunshot, but said death could have been instant. Before the autopsy, police officers took fingerprints from the body to try to identify it. The State Bureau of Investigation, or SBI, could not get a clear match from those prints. So the hands were surgically removed. The SBI processed the hands and got better fingerprints. They identified the body as Charles Edwin Jenkins. On August 30th, 1990, two law enforcement officers went to Joseph Bates's house. They wanted to speak with him. They asked permission to search his vehicle. Joseph said yes. He even helped them look inside. One officer found a newspaper on the floor of the vehicle. The newspaper had a front-page story about the officer's uncle. The officer asked if he could keep the newspaper. Joseph agreed. Inside the newspaper, the officer found a receipt. The receipt had stains that looked like blood. The officers also saw a small piece of rope in a bucket on Joseph's front porch. Joseph let them take that rope. They also took a piece of molding from the vehicle that had what looked like blood on it. The receipt and the molding were sent to the SBI for testing. The substance on them was confirmed to be blood. No usable fingerprints were found on the molding. The SBI could not match the blood to Charles Jenkins because Charles's body had no blood left when it was found. On August 31st, 1990, Joseph Bates gave a confession to the police. The confession was 13 pages long. In it, he admitted to beating Charles with the shovel handle. He admitted to binding him with ropes. He admitted to kidnapping him. He admitted to tying him to a tree. He admitted to questioning him at gunpoint. He admitted to shooting Charles in the neck. He explained that he shot Charles because Charles acted like he knew who had shot into Joseph's house, because Charles spit on him, and because Charles told him to go to hell. That made Joseph angry, so he shot him. Joseph also admitted that he tied a cement block around Charles's neck. But he took the block off when he found it made the body too heavy to throw off the bridge. Then he threw Charles's hog-tied body into the Yadkin River. Joseph was arrested and indicted on October 29, 1990. He was charged with first-degree murder and first-degree kidnapping. The state decided to seek the death penalty. Joseph went to trial in Yadkin County Superior Court in February 1991. The jury found him guilty of both charges. On March 2, 1991, the same jury recommended the death sentence for the murder. The judge sentenced Joseph to death. But Joseph's case did not end there. He appealed. The North Carolina Supreme Court looked at his case. They found a problem. During the first trial, Joseph had asked for money to hire a forensic psychologist. He wanted an expert to examine his brain damage and mental state. The trial judge denied that request without even letting Joseph explain why he needed it in a private hearing. The North Carolina Supreme Court said that was an error. It violated Joseph's rights. So on April 8, 1993, the court reversed the conviction and ordered a new trial. Joseph was tried a second time. The second trial happened in 1994. This time, a jury again found him guilty of first-degree kidnapping and first-degree murder. They found the murder was premeditated and also happened during a kidnapping. During the penalty phase, the jury found two aggravating circumstances. The murder was committed during a kidnapping, and the murder was especially heinous, atrocious, or cruel. The jury recommended the death sentence again. On November 9, 1994, Judge Julius Russo sentenced Joseph to death for the murder. He also gave Joseph an additional 40 years in prison for the kidnapping. Joseph appealed again. The North Carolina Supreme Court affirmed his conviction and death sentence on July 12, 1996. Joseph then asked the United States Supreme Court to hear his case. That court denied his request in 1997. Joseph filed more appeals over the next several years. He argued that his lawyers after the trial did a bad job. One of those lawyers spent very little time on the case. He billed only 12 minutes in 1998. Another lawyer was suffering from depression and did not work effectively. Joseph also argued that the jurors in his second trial never heard the full story about his brain damage from the 1987 car accident. For jurors later said they might have voted differently if they had known about his mental problems. But the courts did not agree to stop the execution. The North Carolina Supreme Court denied a stay on September 24, 2003. Governor Mike Easley held a clemency hearing. Joseph's lawyers asked the governor to change the sentence to life in prison. The governor refused. He said he found no compelling reason to overturn the sentence recommended by two juries and affirmed by the courts. The United States Supreme Court also denied a request to stop the execution on September 25, 2003. On September 26, 2003, at Central Prison in Raleigh, North Carolina, Joseph Earl Bates was executed by lethal injection. He was 35 years old. He had been on death row for over 12 years. Before the execution, the warden asked Joseph if he had any last words. Joseph said he had not really given it any thought. Then he said to read Hebrews chapter 13, verse 6. That verse says, "So that we may boldly say, the Lord is my helper, and I will not fear what man shall do unto me." None of Joseph's relatives watched. For law enforcement officers and two relatives of Charles Jenkins watched through a window. Joseph looked straight ahead. He was pronounced dead at 2:14 a.m. Charles Edwin Jenkins's brother David Jenkins said after the execution that life is valuable and that his brother's life was taken, so a life had to be paid. Joseph Earl Bates was the 876th murderer executed in the United States since 1976. The third murderer executed in North Carolina in 2003, and the 26th murderer executed in North Carolina since 1976. His final meal was fried pork chops, French fries, hush puppies, apple pie, a Pepsi, and a Dr. Pepper. Story 3. Edward Ernest Hartman was born on August 25, 1964. His mother was named Dot Simpson. Edward never knew his father well. His father was not part of his life. This meant Edward grew up without a father in the house. Dot Simpson had many boyfriends over the years. She also got married many times. In total, Edward had 6 different stepfathers while he was growing up. Each stepfather came into the house and then left after some time. This made Edward's home life very unstable. Edward saw things that a child should not see. He watched his mother get beaten by her husbands. The beatings happened in front of him. He also saw his mother try to kill herself more than once. These events scared Edward and hurt him deeply. When Edward was 8 years old, something very bad happened to him. His uncle, who was 16 years old at the time, made Edward perform oral sex on him. This happened many times. The uncle forced Edward to do this. Edward could not stop it. Later, one of his mother's stepsons also sexually abused Edward. These were adults and older children taking advantage of a young boy. Because of all this, Edward had many emotional and mental problems. He felt sad and scared most of the time. He had trouble knowing who he was. He acted without thinking. He also had trouble telling what was real and what was not. Doctors later said he had an adjustment disorder, a conversion disorder, a closed head injury, and a personality disorder. He was also very depressed and anxious. Edward started drinking alcohol when he was still young. He drank more and more as he got older. Alcohol made him feel less pain for a short time, but it also caused more problems. Edward went to school like other children. He did not do well in school because of his problems at home and inside his head. He had few friends. The friends he did have were often like him, people who did not fit in. As a teenager and young adult, Edward realized he was gay. He did not hide this, but he also did not talk about it openly to everyone. Edward had trouble keeping jobs. He would work for a short time and then lose the job. He moved from place to place. He did not have a stable home or a steady income. He often depended on others to let him stay with them. Edward's mother, Dot Simpson, had a boyfriend named Herman Smith. Junior Herman was much older than Dot. He was in his 70s. Dot lived with Herman for some time in Virginia. Then they moved together to Northampton County, North Carolina. After a while, Dot and Herman stopped being a couple. Dot moved back to Virginia, but Herman stayed in his house in North Carolina. Edward knew Herman because of his mother. Herman was kind to Edward. When Edward had no place to live, Herman offered to let Edward stay at his house. This happened about 1 year before the events that would come later. Edward moved into Herman Smith's house. Herman was 77 years old at that time. He was in poor health. He had emphysema, which made it hard for him to breathe. He weighed only 93 pounds. He was a small, weak old man. Edward lived in Herman's house. He did not pay rent. Herman let him stay there for free. Edward spent his days doing small chores around the house and drinking beer. He did not have a job. He did not have a car of his own. He used Herman's things. Herman treated Edward like a guest. Edward's mother was far away in Virginia. Edward did not have many other relatives who cared for him. His life had been full of pain, abuse, and instability. Now he was living in an old man's house in a small community called Pine Tops in Northampton County, North Carolina. Edward Hartman lived in Herman Smith's house for about 1 year. During that time, Edward noticed things about Herman. Herman was old and weak. He weighed only 93 pounds. He had trouble breathing because of his lung disease. He could not fight back or protect himself. Edward also noticed that Herman had money. Herman carried cash in his pocket. Edward told a friend named Emery K. Phipps that Herman was wealthy. Edward said Herman always carried between $4,000 and $5,000 on him. Edward told the same friend that he wanted to kill Herman so he could get some of that money. This happened in February or March of 1993, about 3 to 4 months before the crime. On June 3, 1993, Edward was at Herman's house. He worked in the yard during the afternoon. While he worked, he drank beer. He finished a whole 12-pack of beer by himself. That is 12 cans. He was already drunk. Around 7 o'clock in the evening, Edward went to buy another 12-pack of beer. That is 12 more cans. He came back to the house. He and Herman ate dinner together. After dinner, Herman showed Edward his gun. It was a .38 caliber revolver. They talked about fixing the gun. The gun was loaded. Edward kept drinking. By the time it was late, around 11 o'clock at night, Edward had drunk 4 more cans from the second 12-pack. That meant he had drunk 16 cans of beer in total that day. Herman sat down in his recliner chair. This chair was in the den of the house. Herman turned on the television. He watched the news. He did not know anything was wrong. He trusted Edward because Edward lived in his house. Edward was sitting at a table behind Herman. The table was about 5 or 6 feet away from the recliner. The loaded .38 caliber revolver was on the table. Edward picked up the gun. He stood up. He walked up behind Herman. Herman was still watching television. He did not turn around. Edward pointed the gun at the back of Herman's head. Edward later said that he did not like the sight of blood. It made him sick, so he turned his own head away. Then from very close range, he pulled the trigger. The gun fired. The bullet went into the back of Herman Smith's head. Herman died right there in his recliner. Edward did not call for help. He did not call his mother. He did not call the police. Instead, he gathered things he wanted to take. He took the gun. He took the remaining beer. He took a change of clothes. He took his dog. He found Herman's car keys. He left Herman's body sitting in the recliner. The body was still in the chair with blood and the wound. Edward got into Herman's car and drove away. He drove to Norfolk, Virginia. That is where his mother, Dot Simpson, lived. He arrived there on June 4th, 1993, the day after the shooting. When he saw his mother, he asked her a question. He said, "If Herman was to die, do you think you would get anything?" His mother did not know yet that Herman was dead. Edward stayed at his mother's house for 1 day. Then, on Saturday, June 5th, 1993, he drove back to Herman's house. Herman's body was still sitting in the recliner. The body had been there for 2 days. Edward did not call anyone. He left the body there again. He took Herman's car and drove to a town called Roanoke Rapids, North Carolina. He went there to play bingo. Over the next few days, Edward used Herman's personal checks. He wrote checks to himself. On 3 different occasions between Saturday, June 5th and Tuesday, June 8th, he cashed 3 of Herman's checks. Each check was for $50.Heget 50.Heget 150 total. He also tried to cash a check for $2,500 at a bank. The bank teller looked at the signature. The signature on the check did not match the signature the bank had on file for Herman Smith. The teller refused to cash it. On Tuesday, June 8th, 1993, Edward woke up at 3 o'clock in the morning. Herman's body was still in the recliner. By this time, the body had been there for 5 days. It had started to smell. The smell was very bad. Edward could not stand it anymore. Edward decided to hide the body. He went to the backyard of Herman's property. There was a horse stable in the backyard. Edward dug a hole in the ground inside the stable. Then he went back to the house. He wrapped Herman's body in a blanket. He dragged the body out of the house, through a side door, and across the yard to the stable. He put the body in the hole and covered it with dirt. Before he buried the body, Edward took a diamond ring off Herman's finger. Edward later said he did this because he did not have any money. He kept the ring for himself. After burying the body, Edward got back into Herman's car. He drove again to Norfolk, Virginia. He arrived on June 8th or 9. Then he drove to Augusta, Georgia, to visit friends. He arrived there on June 9th, 1993. In Augusta, Edward showed his friends the things he had taken from Herman. He showed them the diamond ring. He showed them the car. He showed them a shotgun that belonged to Herman. He showed them the .38 caliber pistol he had used to shoot Herman. He also showed them a television, a VCR, a leather jacket, and a large amount of cash. Edward tried to sell these items to his friends. The friends did not buy them. On Monday, June 14th, 1993, Edward went back to Norfolk. He took Herman's diamond ring to a pawn shop. He sold the ring for cash. During this whole time, from June 3rd to June 14th, Herman's family had not heard from him. They tried to call him. They tried to reach him. He did not answer. They became worried. But no one knew yet that he was dead. No one knew where his body was. Edward went back to Herman's house one more time. He dug through trash cans. He found a personal check that belonged to Herman. He had torn it up. He also found a piece of paper. On that paper, Edward had written Herman's name many times. He had been practicing how to write Herman's signature so he could forge it on checks. On June 10th, 1993, while Edward was still driving around in Herman's car and cashing checks, an agent from the State Bureau of Investigation named Malcolm McLeod went to Herman's house. The agent searched the property. He looked through a trash can located inside the house. Inside the trash can, he found a ripped-up personal check that belonged to Herman Smith. He also found a piece of paper. On that paper, Herman's name was written several times. Someone had been practicing how to write Herman's signature. That someone was Edward Hartman. Also on June 10th, another agent named Dennis Honeycutt came to the house. He was a crime technician. He used a test called a luminal test inside the house. This test can find blood that cannot be seen with the naked eye. The test showed an uninterrupted line of blood. The blood started from the recliner in the den. The line went out through a side door. The line continued across the yard toward the backyard. This told the agents that a body had been dragged from the recliner, out the door, and into the backyard. Herman's family had already called the police because they could not reach him. They told the police that Herman was missing. The police started looking for him. On June 14th, 1993, Edward pawned Herman's diamond ring in Norfolk, Virginia. That created a record. The police could trace that ring back to Herman. On June 24th, 1993, police arrested Edward in Norfolk, Virginia. He was taken into custody. The police found Herman's .38 caliber revolver under the seat of Herman's car. Edward had been driving that car. The gun was sent to a lab. A forensic serologist named Jennifer Elwell wiped the inside of the gun barrel. The wipe tested positive for blood. After his arrest, Edward gave 2 statements to the police. In his first statement, he said that Herman's death was an accident. He said the gun went off by mistake. The police did not believe him. They questioned him again. In his second statement, Edward confessed to murder. He told the police exactly what he had done. He said he drank 16 beers, walked up behind Herman, turned his head away, and shot Herman in the back of the head. He also told the police where he had buried the body. Edward led the officers to the horse stable in the backyard of Herman's house. The horses had been walking on the ground inside the stable. Their hooves had trampled the dirt so much that no one could see where the ground had been dug up. But Edward pointed to the spot. The officers dug there. They found Herman Smith's body wrapped in a blanket in the hole. A doctor named Marcella Fierro performed an autopsy on Herman's body. She was a professor of pathology. She concluded that the cause of death was a contact gunshot wound to the back of the head. The gun had been pressed close to the skin when it was fired. Edward was charged with first-degree murder and armed robbery. His trial took place in Northampton County Superior Court. The judge was Frank R. Brown. The prosecutor was David Beard. The trial had 2 parts, the guilt phase and the penalty phase. In the guilt phase, the state presented all the evidence. They showed that Edward planned to kill Herman. They showed that Edward told a friend he wanted to kill Herman for money. They showed that Edward used Herman's checks, took his car, pawned his ring, and buried his body. Edward did not present any evidence in the guilt phase. The jury found Edward guilty of first-degree murder. They also found him guilty of robbery with a firearm. In the penalty phase, Edward's lawyers presented evidence about his hard childhood. They showed that he was sexually abused as a child. They showed that he saw his mother beaten and trying to kill herself. They showed that he had mental problems and alcohol problems. They asked the jury to give him life in prison instead of death. The prosecutor, David Beard, asked questions about Edward being gay. During jury selection, Beard asked potential jurors if a person's sexual persuasion would affect their decision. The judge told Beard to stop. During the testimony of Edward's aunt, Beard asked if she knew Edward was a homosexual. The judge told the jury to ignore that question. Beard kept bringing up Edward's homosexuality. The defense lawyers argued that this was meant to make the jury hate Edward because he was gay. The prosecutor later said that the sexual abuse Edward suffered did not matter because Edward was gay. The jury found that the murder was especially bad because Herman was old and weak. Herman was 77 years old, weighed 93 pounds, and had emphysema. The jury decided that this was an aggravating factor. That means it was a reason to give the death penalty. The jury also found 5 mitigating factors. These were reasons to give life in prison, like Edward's alcoholism and his bad childhood. But the jury decided that the bad parts of the crime outweighed the good parts about Edward's past. On October 20th, 1994, the judge sentenced Edward Hartman to death by lethal injection. The judge also gave him a separate sentence of 40 years in prison for the armed robbery. The 40 years would run at the same time as the death sentence, but since the death sentence was carried out, that part did not matter. Edward appealed his case. He argued that the prosecutor's anti-gay comments made his trial unfair. The North Carolina Supreme Court looked at the case in 1996. They said that the judge had told the jury to ignore the prosecutor's improper questions. They said that jurors are presumed to follow the judge's instructions. So they found no error. The death sentence was upheld. Over the next several years, Edward's lawyers filed more appeals. They asked the state and federal courts to stop the execution. They argued that Edward was singled out for the death penalty because he was gay. Gay rights groups protested. The Inter-American Commission on Human Rights asked the U.S. government to look at the case, but the courts rejected the appeals. On January 29, 2003, the North Carolina Secretary of Correction named Theodis Beck set Edward's execution date for February 28, 2003. But on February 6, 2003, a judge issued a stay. The state Supreme Court was deciding whether murder indictments had to include certain legal language. The court eventually ruled against Edward. A new execution date was set. On September 4, 2003, Secretary Beck set a new execution date, October 3, 2003, at 2 a.m. at Central Prison in Raleigh, North Carolina. Edward's lawyers asked Governor Mike Easley to grant clemency. Clemency means reducing the death sentence to life in prison. The lawyers argued again about the anti-gay bias. On October 2, 2003, Governor Easley denied clemency. He said that after a careful review, he found no sufficient reason to overturn the sentence. Later that same day, the U.S. Supreme Court also denied Edward's request for a stay of execution. On October 3, 2003, at 2 a.m., Edward Hartman was brought into the death chamber at Central Prison. He looked through a window at one of his lawyers, Heather Wells. He said hi or hey to her. He smiled. Then he turned away. He did not say any final statement. He stared at the ceiling. He closed his eyes sometimes. At 2:14 a.m., prison medical workers administered the lethal drugs. Edward Ernest Hartman was pronounced dead. He was 39 years old. Herman Smith, Jr., the 77-year-old man who had let Edward live in his home, remained dead. His body had been found in the horse stable. His son, Larry Smith, watched the execution. He did not speak to reporters afterward. Edward's final meal was a Greek salad, linguine with clam sauce, garlic bread, cheesecake with cherry topping, and a Coca-Cola. No one from Edward's family came to watch him die. Outside the prison, About 100 people who opposed the death penalty held candles and sang. Some protesters sat in a driveway to block traffic. No one was arrested. The execution was completed. Edward Ernest Hartman was executed by lethal injection on October 3, 2003, for the murder of Herman Smith, Jr. Story 4. John Clayton Smith was born on March 1, 1962, in the state of Missouri. He was a white male. Not many details are known about his parents or his very early childhood. But as he grew into a young man, he started having problems with the law. In 1981, when John Clayton Smith was 19 years old, he had a legal issue involving a work permit. A lawyer named David B. Bentiel helped him with that case. At that time, Bentiel worked as a defense attorney. Smith was able to resolve that matter with Bentiel's help. 2 years later, in 1983, Smith committed a felony. He stole property that did not belong to him. He was convicted of felony stealing. Once again, the same lawyer, David B. Bentiel, represented him as his defense attorney. Smith shared personal information with Bentiel during that legal representation. Smith trusted Bentiel with details about his life and his past actions. Over the years that followed, Smith had relationships with women. Some of those relationships became troubled. He showed a pattern of violent behavior toward women. On at least one occasion, he choked his wife. On another occasion, he got into a fight with a coworker. He also had a prior conviction for violating an order of protection. This meant that a court had told him to stay away from someone, and he broke that rule. Smith also struggled with his mental health. He had been diagnosed with bipolar disorder. This illness included psychotic features, which meant he sometimes lost touch with reality. He also suffered from recurrent major depression and a personality disorder. At different times in his life, he was admitted to mental health institutions for treatment. He also depended heavily on alcohol. His drinking was a problem that made his behavior worse. At some point, Smith got married. His wife's name was Mary Smith. They had children together, but the marriage did not last. They divorced. After the divorce, Smith did not see his children very often. For 1 year and a half, he had no contact with them at all. Then, in June of 1997, he suddenly reached out to his ex-wife. He asked to visit his children. He visited them several times that month. During one of those visits, he gave Mary Smith some savings bonds and coin collections. He said he wanted the children to have those items. In 1995, Smith started dating a young woman named Brandy Kearns. She was 22 years old at that time. Brandy lived with her mother, Yvonne Kurz, and her stepfather, Wayne Howing. Their home was near Canton, Missouri, a small town by the Mississippi River. Brandy also had a baby daughter named Tatum. Smith and Brandy made plans to live together. Smith borrowed $30,000 to buy a house for the two of them. He was committed to the relationship. But near the start of June 1997, Brandy broke off the relationship. She told Smith she did not want to be with him anymore. After the breakup, Brandy continued to live in the same house with her mother, her stepfather, and her baby daughter. Smith was upset about the breakup. He did not take it well. Later that same month, Smith called his ex-wife Mary. He was clearly upset. Mary asked him what was wrong. He said everything. When she asked if he was having trouble with Brandy, he replied, "Just everything. I can't talk about it now. I gotta go." Then he hung up the phone. Smith also called Brandy's mother, Yvonne Kurz, during that time. He asked if Brandy had come home the night before. Yvonne said no. Then Smith asked, "She is seeing someone else, isn't she?" He seemed worried that Brandy had found a new boyfriend. He did not like that idea. On the morning of July 4th, 1997, Smith drove by a tavern called O'Cease Tavern in Canton. He looked at Brandy's car, which had been parked in the lot next to the tavern since the night before. He was checking to see where she had been. Later that afternoon, he saw Brandy driving on the highway. He followed her to a friend's house. He pulled his truck up behind her car in the driveway. Brandy got out of her car and spoke to Smith for about 3 minutes. Then he left. That evening, at 11:05 p.m., Smith went to a convenience store in Canton. He bought a 12-pack of beer. The store clerk noticed that Smith seemed distracted. The clerk said Smith appeared to be in a weird mood. Smith took the beer and left the store. Smith had 3 guns in his truck. He did not take any of them with him when he left the truck later that night. He only took some of the beers. After buying the beer, Smith drove toward the house where Brandy Kearns lived with her mother Yvonne Kurz and stepfather Wayne Hoeing. He arrived sometime after 1:48 a.m. on July 5, 1997. The house was near Canton, Missouri. Smith parked his truck about 30 yards away from the house. He took some of the beers with him. He left the 3 guns inside the truck. He did not take them. Smith walked around a large pond on the property. He approached the house quietly. He entered through the basement door. Once inside the basement, he took off his shoes. Then he went upstairs into the main part of the house. Smith went straight to Brandy Kearns's bedroom. She was inside. He attacked her with a knife. Brandy managed to get away from him. She ran toward the living room and kitchen area. As she ran, Smith grabbed the back of her shirt. He tried to stab her in the back while she was running. In the living room and kitchen, Smith struggled with Brandy. He stabbed and cut her 8 times. The knife wounds were on her neck, chest, abdomen, arm, and thigh. 2 stab wounds went into her right breast. Those wounds punctured her lung. Other wounds cut her liver and one of her kidneys. During the attack, Brandy's clothing was partially torn off. Brandy did not die right away. Even though she was badly hurt, she was still alive for a short time. She tried to call her father. She left a message on his phone that said, "Dad, come to the house and get Tatum." Tatum was Brandy's baby daughter, who was asleep somewhere in the house. Then Brandy used her own blood to write on the kitchen floor. She wrote 3 messages. One message said, "It was Joe Dash. She did not finish writing the full name John." Another message said, "I tattoo Dash," which meant I love Tatum. A third message said, "Andy SV Tatum," which also referred to Tatum. These messages showed that she wanted people to know who attacked her and that she wanted her baby to be safe. While Brandy was lying on the floor dying, Smith went to another bedroom. This was the bedroom of Wayne Hoeing, Brandy's stepfather. Wayne had been sleeping, but he woke up because he heard the sounds of the struggle in the living room. Smith pushed Wayne onto the bed. He got on top of Wayne and started stabbing him. He stabbed and cut Wayne 11 times. The wounds were on Wayne's chest, arms, leg, hand, and hip. Wayne did not die immediately from these wounds. Yvonne Kurz, Brandy's mother and Wayne's wife, also woke up because of the noise. She got out of bed and tried to push Smith off of Wayne. Smith slashed her forearm with the knife. Yvonne was cut, but she ran away into the bathroom. She closed the door to hide from Smith. Smith followed Yvonne to the bathroom door. While he was standing at that door, Wayne Hoeing was still alive on the bed. Wayne managed to pick up a loaded gun that he kept in the house. He pointed the gun at Smith. Smith saw the gun. He did not run away. Instead, he said to Wayne, "Shoot me. Go ahead and shoot me." Wayne did not fire the gun. No shots were fired. Eventually, Smith stopped. He left the bedroom. He went back downstairs to the basement. He put his shoes back on. Then he left the house through the basement door. After Smith left, Yvonne Kurz came out of the bathroom. She called for help. Medical first responders and police were sent to the house. When the first responders arrived, Brandy Kearns was already dead. She was lying face up on the kitchen floor. Her baby daughter Tatum was found unharmed at Brandy's feet. Wayne Hoeing was still alive for a short time. The first responders tried to help him, but while they were still at the scene, Wayne died from loss of blood. Smith did not go home after leaving the house. Instead, he He walked from the Hoeing residence to a nearby farm. The farm belonged to a man named Bill Lloyd. Smith hid the knife he had used under some pieces of tin on the farm property. Then he tried to steal a tractor. He got onto the tractor and tried to drive it away. But he crashed the tractor into a flatbed trailer that was on the farm. The tractor was damaged and would not go. Smith left the farm on foot. He went to another nearby residence. At that second place, he stole a truck. He drove away in the stolen truck. But he crashed that truck as well. Soon after the crash, Smith was caught by police. At the crime scene, police found several pieces of evidence. They saw a trail of blood that Smith left behind as he walked out of the house. They found one of Smith's socks under Wayne Hoeing's body. They found 3 beer cans outside the house. They also found the keys that Smith had used to break into the house through the basement door. Police did not find the knife at the scene. Several days later, a worker at Bill Lloyd's farm found a knife hidden under some tin. The knife was given to police. The original owner of that knife was a woman who had given it to Smith. She identified the knife as the one she had given him. At the time of the crime, some people noticed that something was wrong. The convenience store clerk had seen Smith in a weird mood when he bought the beer. Smith's ex-wife had spoken to him on the phone that morning and heard that he was very upset. But no one knew what Smith was about to do. No arrests were made until after the crash of the stolen truck. After Smith crashed the stolen truck, police took him into custody. He was arrested. At that time, police did not yet know the full details of what had happened inside the Hoeing house. But they knew that 2 people were dead and that Smith had been acting strangely. Police went back to the crime scene to collect more evidence. They noticed a trail of blood leading away from the house. That blood came from Smith's own wounds or from the victim's. The trail showed which way Smith had gone when he left. Police also recovered one of Smith's socks from under Wayne Hoeing's body. That sock connected Smith directly to the attack on Wayne. 3 beer cans were found outside the house. They matched the 12-pack Smith had bought that night. Police also found the keys Smith had used to break into the basement door. Those keys showed that he had entered the house without permission. Several days after the murders, a worker at Bill Lloyd's farm found a knife hidden under some tin. The worker gave the knife to police. The woman who had originally owned the knife came forward. She said she had given that knife to John Clayton Smith. The knife was the weapon used in the stabbings. Police also learned about the messages Brandy Kearns had written in her own blood on the kitchen floor. The messages said it was Joe Dash, I tattoo Dash, and Andy SVT Tum. Police seized the linoleum floor piece that had those blood messages. They kept it as evidence. The messages helped prove that Smith was the attacker because Brandy had started to write his first name before she died. Smith was formally charged with 2 counts of first-degree murder and 2 counts of armed criminal action. He was also charged with burglary and assault for cutting Yvonne Kurz. The trial took place in Audrain County, Missouri, because the case was moved from Lewis County. The trial started and ended in 1999. At trial, Smith did not argue that someone else committed the murders. He admitted that he was the killer, but his lawyers said he could not fully plan or think clearly before the killings because of his mental health problems. They called a doctor named Michael Stacy to testify. Dr. Stacy said Smith had recurrent major depression and a personality disorder. He said Smith's ability to deliberate was seriously impaired. The prosecution called their own expert, Dr. Jerome Peters. Dr. Peters diagnosed Smith with narcissistic personality disorder. The prosecution also showed evidence of Smith's past violence, including choking his wife and violating a protection order. They presented his prior conviction for felony stealing. They showed how the murders affected the victims' families. They argued that Smith planned the attack carefully. The jury found Smith guilty on all charges. Then came the penalty phase, where the jury decided whether Smith would get life in prison or the death penalty. The jury found several aggravating circumstances. For Brandy's murder, they said Smith committed it while also committing another murder and while committing a burglary. For Wayne's murder, they added that the killing was wantonly vile, horrible, and inhuman. The jury recommended the death penalty for each murder. On July 6, 1999, the trial court judge sentenced John Clayton Smith to death on both murder counts. The judge also sentenced him to 20 years in prison for each armed criminal action count. Those sentences were to be served one after the other. Smith appealed his case. On December 5, 2000, the Missouri Supreme Court upheld his conviction and death sentence. 5 judges agreed, and 2 disagreed. The 2 dissenting judges said the prosecutor should have stepped aside because he had once been Smith's defense lawyer. But the majority ruled that this was not a reason to overturn the sentence. After that, Smith stopped fighting. He told the court that he was totally guilty, very sorry, and mentally fit to give up his appeals. He said he was ready to die once and for all. He wrote that the punishment of death was suitable for what he had done. He waived his remaining appeals. In March 2003, the Missouri Supreme Court ruled that Smith was competent to make that decision. The Missouri Catholic Conference and a former public defender tried to file clemency requests on Smith's behalf. They asked Governor Bob Holden to stop the execution. But Smith did not want those requests. Governor Holden denied clemency on October 28, 2003. The U.S. Supreme Court also declined to intervene. On October 29, 2003, at 12:01 a.m., John Clayton Smith was executed by lethal injection at the Potosi Correctional Center in Missouri. He was 41 years old. He had no last meal but ate ice cream and granola bars throughout the day. His final words were an apology to the victims' families. He said he was truly sorry and asked for forgiveness. Behind the glass, Brandy's sister Bridie Brooks shouted, "Burn in hell." Smith's family did not attend. The victims' families were left to grieve. Brandy's daughter Tatum, who was found unharmed at her mother's feet, went to live with her grandmother. She was not told about the attacks. Brandy's family said Tatum blew kisses when she passed the cemetery where her mother was buried. Wayne Hoing's children remembered their father. John Clayton Smith became the 878th person executed in the United States since 1976, and the 61st person executed in Missouri since that year. Story 5. James Willie Brown was born on June 6, 1948. His mother was only 15 years old when she gave birth to him. His father was an alcoholic. The family was very poor. They lived in a low-income neighborhood. Their house had no running water, no indoor toilet, and no heat. James had 3 siblings, a younger brother named Harold, a younger sister, and another brother. The children were often hungry. They ate only 1 meal a day, usually beans and cornbread. Rats and other vermin lived in the house and bit the children while they slept. James's father beat the children regularly. He used belts, boards, branches, cords, and his fists. He also kicked them. The beatings happened several times a day. James was beaten so hard that he lost consciousness more than once. His father also beat James's mother in front of the children. When James tried to help his mother, his father beat him again. The father sometimes beat James in public, in front of friends and family. This added humiliation to the physical pain. When James was a young child, a maternal uncle sexually molested him. James did not tell anyone about this abuse. Around the 2nd grade, James developed a severe stutter. He had trouble speaking. Other children made fun of him. Some adults, including teachers and his parents, also mocked him. James liked school, but he was afraid to speak or ask questions because of the ridicule. James repeated the 3rd grade. He repeated the 7th grade. He repeated the 8th grade. He dropped out of school after repeating the 9th grade for the 2nd time. When James was 14 years old, he began having severe headaches and blackouts. At age 15, doctors at the Emory Medical Clinic diagnosed him with a convulsive disorder, which is a type of seizure condition. They gave him medication to control the seizures. The medication helped for a while, but the headaches and blackouts continued. At age 17, James joined the United States Marine Corps. He served for 16 months. During that time, he was hospitalized twice for mental health problems. He received electroshock treatment. The military discharged him because of mental illness. He did not go to Vietnam. After leaving the military, James could not hold a steady job. He did odd jobs with his younger brother Harold. He tried to earn money, but his mental health was getting worse. He began using illegal drugs, mostly LSD. In 1968, James was arrested for the first time. The charge involved breaking into a home and attacking a woman. However, a court found that James was not mentally competent to stand trial. This meant he did not have the mental ability to understand the court process or help his own lawyer. Instead of going to trial, he was sent to Central State Hospital, a mental institution. At Central State Hospital, doctors noted that James had symptoms including headaches, passing out, hearing voices, and hearing noises. He also tried to cut his own throat while in jail. He stayed at the hospital for 6 months. Doctors diagnosed him with a psychoneurotic disorder. He was released. Within 2 months of his release, James was readmitted to Central State Hospital. This time he stayed for 18 months. During this stay, at least one doctor diagnosed him with paranoid schizophrenia. Paranoid schizophrenia is a serious mental illness where a person hears voices, has false beliefs, and feels that others are trying to harm them. James was released again. In December 1972, he was admitted to Central State Hospital for a third time. He stayed there until January 1974. Some of this time he lived as an outpatient, meaning he slept at the hospital but left during the day. During these years, James had few close friends. He spent time with his brother Harold, but Harold noticed that James was mean. Harold later said that James laughed when their father did cruel things, such as pulling the teeth out of a possum with tweezers. Harold also said that James killed animals for fun, including hanging a neighbor's baby ducks and swinging cats until their necks broke. James met a woman at an all-night diner. He married her. She supported him for a time, but his behavior was unpredictable. By early 1975, James was 26 years old. He was living in the Atlanta area. He still had no steady job. He continued to have headaches, blackouts, and episodes where he heard voices. He believed that God and demons were speaking to him. He also believed that people were trying to kill him with poison or germs. He was not taking his medication regularly. He spent his nights driving around and visiting bars. James spent the evening of May 12, 1975, driving around the Atlanta area. He went to a nightclub where women danced for money. That club was called a night spot. One of the dancers was Brenda Sue Watson. She was 21 years old. She had recently moved to DeKalb County from Florida. She worked as a dancer at this club. James met Brenda at the club. They talked. He asked her to go with him to a motel bar called the Markin Lounge. Brenda agreed. They arrived at the Markin Lounge at approximately 8:30 p.m. James had brought carry-out food with him. 2 steak dinners with potatoes. He and Brenda ate the steak dinners at the bar. After they finished eating, James ordered drinks. Brenda drank with him. They spent several hours drinking alcohol. They also danced together. The waitress at the bar served them and watched them interact. Nothing seemed forced or angry. James and Brenda appeared to be having a normal evening together. Around 11 p.m., James and Brenda left the Markin Lounge together. They got into James's car. No one saw Brenda alive again after that moment. James did not drive Brenda back to her home. Instead, he drove to a secluded area off Deshawn Road in Gwinnett County. This was a heavily wooded area. There was an old logging road. About 500 feet off the road, near a trash pile, James stopped the car. Brenda got out of the car with James. Once they were in the woods, James took out a length of nylon cord. He had brought this cord with him in his car. He used the cord to tie Brenda's wrists together. He also tied her ankles together. He tied a cord around her left ankle in particular, and there were marks on her right ankle and wrists showing she had been tied there as well. James then removed most of Brenda's clothes. She was left wearing only a blue terry cloth blouse, which he pulled up over her breasts. She was otherwise naked. James took Brenda's panties. He did not throw them away. Instead, he forced the panties into her mouth. He pushed them down her throat. He pushed them so far that they blocked her airway. She could not breathe. She began to suffocate. While Brenda was suffocating, James raped her. He had sexual intercourse with her. The panties remained in her throat during this act. The medical examiner later found seminal fluid and sperm in both Brenda's throat and her vagina. The examiner also found abrasions and contusions around her vagina, which showed that the rape happened before she died. Brenda died from suffocation. The panties blocked her windpipe completely. She could not get air. Her body stopped breathing. The time of death was no later than 4 a.m. on May 13, 1975. This was determined because the steak and potatoes from her dinner were still undigested in her stomach, and a meal usually takes about 4 hours to digest. After Brenda was dead, James left her body in the woods. He did not cover her or hide her. The body was left near the trash pile, partially covered by leaves. James then walked back to his car. As he drove away, he noticed that Brenda's pocketbook was still in his car. He did not want to be caught with it. He drove to a bridge on Killian Hill Road. He stopped the car, took the pocketbook, and threw it into the Yellow River below. James then drove home. He did not call the police. He did not tell anyone what he had done. The next day, May 13th, a man was walking through the woods off Deshawn Road. He was looking for collectible items or things he could take. He found Brenda's body lying near the trash pile. The body was naked except for the blue blouse pulled up over her breasts. There was a cord tied around her left ankle. The man saw that something was wrong. He left the area and contacted the police. Police officers arrived at the scene. They saw the cord on Brenda's ankle. They also saw marks on her wrists and right ankle. They noted that her panties were not on her body. They did not immediately see the panties because they were deep inside her throat. The officers collected evidence from the scene and took the body to the medical examiner. At this point, the police did not know who had killed Brenda. They began asking questions at the Mark-In Lounge. The waitress remembered serving a man and a woman who ate steak dinners, drank, and danced. She described the man. Police also learned that Brenda worked as a dancer at an Atlanta nightclub. They started looking for anyone who had seen her leave with a man. 3 days later, on May 15, 1975, police arrested James. They had connected him to Brenda through witness descriptions. When police searched James's car, they found nylon cord. That cord was identical to the cord tied around Brenda's left ankle. They also found a hairbrush in the car. The hairbrush contained hair that matched Brenda's hair in color and structure. When police first questioned James on May 16th, he said he did not know Brenda Watson at all. He denied ever meeting her. Police then told him that witnesses had seen him with Brenda the night before her body was found. James changed his story. He admitted that he and Brenda had gone to the Mark-In for drinks. But he said that afterward they went to a different lounge off Covington Highway, and he left her there. Police did not believe this. They questioned him again. James gave a third version of events. He said that when he and Brenda left the Mark-In, Brenda suggested they go to a quiet place in the country. He agreed and drove her to a secluded spot off Deshawn Road. Once they were there, Brenda told James that if he did not pay her $200, she would call the police and say he tried to rape her. James said that he then tied her up and gagged her. Then he said he decided he might as well have sexual intercourse with her, so he did. James admitted that he was the one who tied Brenda. He admitted that he had sex with her. He admitted that he threw her pocketbook into the river. He did not at first admit that he had forced her panties down her throat. He did not admit that he caused her death by suffocation. The police did not yet know about the panties because the autopsy had not been completed. After James admitted to tying Brenda and having sex with her, the police waited for the autopsy results. The autopsy was performed by Warren Tillman from the State Crime Lab. During the autopsy, Tillman made a shocking discovery. Brenda's panties were not missing. They were forced so far down her throat that they could not be seen without a full internal examination. Tillman had to use large medical prongs to reach them. He determined that Brenda died from suffocation caused by the panties blocking her airway. Tillman also found seminal fluid and sperm in Brenda's throat and vagina. He found abrasions and contusions around her vagina. These injuries showed that she had been raped, and the rape occurred while she was still alive. The undigested steak and potatoes in her stomach told him she died no later than 4 a.m. on May 13th. With this evidence, the police had enough to charge James with murder and rape. However, before the trial could begin, James's mental condition became a problem. He was taken to Central State Hospital for evaluation. Doctors there found that he was out of contact with reality. They said he was overtly psychotic. He believed someone was trying to kill him with poison. He heard voices from God and the devil. The doctors diagnosed him with paranoid schizophrenia. They determined that he was not mentally competent to stand trial. This meant he could not understand the court proceedings or help his own lawyer. Because of this finding, James was not put on trial. Instead, he was committed to Central State Hospital. He stayed there for several years. During his time at the hospital, he was given medication. The medication helped control his symptoms for periods of time. But he also had episodes where he became psychotic again. At one point in 1977, hospital records described him as deranged, preaching the gospel and signing his name as Jesus Christ. Another record said he sat alone with his coat over his head all day. From 1975 until 1981, James spent most of his time in mental hospitals. He was at Central State Hospital either as a patient or under evaluation. Over those years, state doctors diagnosed him as a paranoid schizophrenic 17 separate times. In 1981, doctors determined that James had become competent to stand trial. His schizophrenia was in remission, meaning the symptoms were controlled by medication. The court agreed. He was returned to Gwinnett County to face trial. The trial took place in 1981. The jury heard all the evidence. The nylon cord matched the hairbrush with Brenda's hair, James's multiple statements, and the autopsy findings about the panties and the rape. The jury found James guilty of murder. In the sentencing phase, the jury sentenced him to death. The Georgia Supreme Court affirmed the conviction and sentence in 1982. James remained on death row for several years. In 1988, a federal court reviewed his case. The court decided that there were serious questions about whether James had actually been competent to stand trial in 1981. The court overturned his conviction and ordered a new trial. James was sent back to Gwinnett County to be tried again. Before the second trial, James was evaluated again. 2 doctors concluded he was competent. A special jury was impaneled just to decide the question of his competency. That jury found him competent to stand trial. The case then proceeded to a full retrial in 1990 and 1991. At the second trial, James did not claim insanity. His lawyers argued that he was simply not guilty. However, during the sentencing phase, 2 experts testified that James was psychotic at the time of the crime and that his mental illness should be considered as a reason to spare his life. The prosecution had a different strategy. They called a psychiatrist who testified that James was not schizophrenic. The doctor said James either had drug-induced flashbacks from LSD or he was faking his mental illness. The prosecution also called a witness named Anita Jean Tucker. Tucker was a female inmate who had been in jail with James. She testified that James told her he was faking his mental illness to get a lighter sentence. She said he coached her on how to act crazy. The jury believed the prosecution. They found James guilty of murder again. In the sentencing phase, they voted to sentence him to death. The judge imposed that sentence in 1991. The Georgia Supreme Court upheld the death sentence in a ruling issued in 1991. For the next 12 years, James's lawyers filed appeals. They argued that he was too mentally ill to be executed. In 2002, a key development occurred. Anita Jean Tucker came forward and said she had lied at the second trial. She admitted that her testimony about James faking mental illness was false. She said the prosecution had promised to support her early parole in exchange for her testimony. The victim's family and several jurors from the second trial asked the parole board to spare James's life. But the courts ruled that even if Tucker lied, it did not change the outcome of the case. James was scheduled to be executed multiple times. A judge delayed an execution in 2002, but on November 4, 2003, no more delays were granted. He was 55 years old. On that day, James was given a last meal. He asked for a foot-long chili dog with everything: French fries, a dill pickle, strawberry ice cream, and a 7-Up soft drink. He ate all of it. At 8:32 p.m., James was taken to the execution chamber at the state prison in Jackson, Georgia. He was asked if he wanted to make a final statement. He shook his head no. He was asked if he wanted a final prayer. He shook his head no again. He was then given a lethal injection. He twitched slightly and moved his head back and forth. He took a few deep breaths, his cheeks puffing, and then he was still. He was pronounced dead at 8:32 p.m. Brenda Sue Watson's family had waited 28 years for this moment. Some of them supported the execution, while others later joined requests for clemency. James's younger brother, Harold, did not attend the execution or the funeral. He had become a paramedic and firefighter and said he could not understand how his brother became so different from him. James Willie Brown was the 34th person executed in Georgia since the death penalty was reinstated in 1976. He was the 879th person executed in the United States since that time. The case ended with James's death by lethal injection, and the long legal battle over his mental illness was closed forever. Story 6. Joseph Timothy Keel was born on July 6, 1964. His family called him Timmy. He was born in North Carolina, in the United States. His father was Joseph P. Keel. His mother was Linda Keel. The family lived in a rural part of eastern North Carolina. The area had many farms and open land. Timmy had 2 younger brothers. Their names were Bobby, also called Danny, and Chris. The family was close. They were raised in a Baptist religious background. Timmy's parents taught him right from wrong. They gave their children proper morals, according to family members. When Timmy was about 9 years old, he became involved with his grandfather's business. His grandfather made moonshine. Moonshine is illegal whiskey. This happened in the rural area where they lived. Timmy's grandfather and his uncles encouraged him to take part in this business. At age 11, Timmy started drinking alcohol. His grandfather and uncles encouraged him to drink. They thought it was normal. Timmy continued to drink as he grew older. His grandfather later died from cirrhosis of the liver. Cirrhosis is a disease caused by long-term drinking. Timmy did not do well in school. He dropped out of school when he was 16 years old. Around that same age, he began using drugs. He used amphetamines. He also drank large amounts of vodka. He used cocaine as well. These habits became part of his daily life. His drinking and drug use caused problems. Timmy started having blackouts. A blackout means a person cannot remember what happened during a period of time. During these blackouts, Timmy became violent. He hurt himself. He also hurt other people. His mother saw these problems. She had him committed to a mental health treatment program. That meant he was sent to a facility to get help for his mental state. Timmy also suffered physical injuries to his head. He was born with possible brain damage from before birth. Later in life, he had a workplace accident. A steel beam that weighed 1,600 pounds hit him on the head. This caused more damage to his brain. Doctors later said he had organic brain damage. That means his brain did not work normally because of physical injury. Timmy had a son. The baby's name was Victor Matthew Keel. The baby was born in 1985. On June 26, 1986, the baby died. Victor was 11 months old at the time of his death. The cause of death was a skull fracture. An autopsy showed a 3-inch fracture on the right side of the baby's head. Timmy said the baby fell down the steps of his mobile home. He also said the baby hit his head on a door at his grandmother's house. The doctors found bruises on the baby's head, face, legs, and arms. The bruises were recent, about 6 to 8 hours old. In 1987, a jury convicted Timmy of involuntary manslaughter for the death of his infant son. Involuntary manslaughter means causing a death without meaning to kill, but by doing something reckless or careless. He served prison time for this conviction. After he got out of prison, Timmy married a woman named Amy Sawyer. They lived in a house in Edgecombe County. The house was owned by Amy's father. Her father's name was John Simmons. John Simmons was 42 years old. He was a white male. Timmy and Amy lived with John Simmons in that house. Timmy found work at a hog farm. The farm was called Shellbank Farm. He worked there as an employee. His direct supervisor said Timmy was a good worker. Timmy's job involved taking care of hogs and doing other farm tasks. Timmy continued to drink alcohol and use cocaine. He had a history of alcoholism in his family. He had tried treatment programs for drug and alcohol abuse. But he kept using. People around him could smell alcohol on him. Sometimes he cried. Sometimes he got into arguments. In July 1990, Timmy's wife Amy was pregnant with their child. Timmy and his father-in-law John Simmons did not always get along. There were arguments in the house. On July 9, 1990, a neighbor named Cecilia Edmondson saw Timmy standing outside her house. Timmy had been drinking. He smelled of alcohol. John Simmons was there too. The two men argued. Simmons accused Timmy of being a woman beater. Simmons also asked Timmy what kind of drugs he was taking. Timmy became angry. He said, "I'm going to kill that bald-headed, motherfucking son of a bitch if he doesn't leave me alone." He was talking about John Simmons. The neighbor heard him say this. That was the day before John Simmons was shot. On July 10, 1990, Timmy Keel went through a normal day at first. He was living in the house owned by his father-in-law, John Simmons. Timmy's wife, Amy, was pregnant. That evening, around 8 p.m., Timmy made a phone call. He called his boss at Shellbank Farm. The boss's name was Gary Stanbaugh. Timmy asked for permission to go fishing at a pond on the farm. Stanbaugh said yes. Timmy also asked if he could borrow the farm truck to drive to the pond. Stanbaugh allowed this. At that time, a single-shot .22 caliber rifle was kept behind the seat of the farm truck. The rifle was always there. Timmy knew this because he worked at the farm. After hanging up, Timmy did something unusual. He did not tell anyone he was going fishing. Instead, he went to his father-in-law, John Simmons. Timmy told Simmons a lie. He said his boss had called and told him to go to the farm to check on the hogs. This was not true. Simmons believed him. Simmons agreed to drive Timmy to the farm in his own truck. Simmons's truck was a small yellow pickup. They left the house together. Simmons drove. Timmy sat in the passenger seat. They drove to Shellbank Farm. When they arrived, Timmy first went to the farm manager's house. That was where Gary Stambaugh lived. Timmy took the farm truck from the driveway. Then he told Simmons to follow him. Timmy drove the farm truck ahead. Simmons followed in his yellow pickup. They drove down to the farm office building. This building was where workers changed clothes and kept supplies. The hog pens were nearby. Timmy stopped the farm truck near the office. He went inside the building. Simmons parked his pickup outside. Simmons stayed in his truck for a moment. Timmy was now inside the office. He picked up the .22 caliber rifle from behind the seat of the farm truck before going in, or he retrieved it once inside. The details show the rifle was available. From inside the building, Timmy aimed the rifle at Simmons's truck. He fired one shot through the window of the truck cab. The bullet hit John Simmons. Simmons got out of his truck. He was wounded but still alive. He said he had been hit. Timmy told Simmons to sit down in the kitchen area of the farm building. Simmons went inside and sat down. Then Simmons pulled out a knife. He had picked it up from a counter or brought it with him. Simmons came toward Timmy with the knife. Timmy fired the rifle again. This second shot hit Simmons again. Simmons fell down. Simmons got back up. He was still alive, though badly hurt. Timmy then helped Simmons walk back to the yellow pickup truck. Timmy put Simmons inside the truck. Simmons was seated, slumped over. Timmy then drove the truck to the front of the office building. He parked the truck near a window. He went back inside the office. He picked up the rifle again. He went to the window. He fired a third shot through the window. This shot hit Simmons in the head. Simmons died from his wounds. After the shooting, Timmy tried to clean up. He took mops from the office. He wiped blood off the floor. He found a jumpsuit that had blood on it. He put the jumpsuit in a washing machine and started the machine. He also found a bloody mop outside the building. He kicked dirt over a puddle of blood outside the office. He threw the rifle into a hog pen. He wanted to hide it. Then Timmy drove Simmons's yellow pickup truck away from the farm. Simmons was dead inside the truck. Timmy drove to a mobile home park called Baker's Park. He stopped at the mobile home of a man named Aubrey Thurman. It was about 10 p.m. Timmy knocked on the door. Aubrey Thurman opened the door. Timmy told Thurman that John Simmons had been shot. Timmy's shirt was covered in blood. Simmons was still in the pickup truck outside. He was sitting in the passenger seat, facing the steering wheel. He was not moving. Thurman's wife, Shelby Thurman, called 911 for emergency help. While waiting, Timmy told the Thurmans a lie. He said that Simmons had been shot by someone in a red station wagon near some dumpsters on Gay Road. He said it was a drive-by shooting. He said he had heard two pops when a car passed them. Deputy Sheriff Bob Davis arrived at the mobile home park. Timmy met him in the yard. Timmy told Davis the same lie. He said he had received a phone call asking him to go to the farm. He said Simmons drove him. He said on the way back, someone in a red station wagon shot Simmons twice near the intersection of Leggett Road and Gay Road. Deputy Davis looked at the truck. He found a bullet hole behind the driver's side window. There was a pool of blood in the passenger seat near the window. The truck windows were rolled down and intact. Sergeant Donnie Lynn also arrived. Timmy told him the same story. Timmy said his boss called him to check on the hogs. He said he took the farm truck and Simmons followed. He said after checking the farm, he left the farm truck and rode back with Simmons. He repeated the story about the drive-by shooting on Gay Road near dumpsters. Sergeant Lynn asked Timmy to show him where this happened. Timmy went with Sergeant Lynn to Gay Road that night. They looked around the dumpsters. Sergeant Lynn found nothing that showed a drive-by shooting had happened there. No bullet casings. No blood. No skid marks. Nothing matched the story. The next morning, July 11th, 1990, a coworker named James Stevie arrived at the farm. Stevie was the first to arrive. He noticed that the key normally kept over the front door of the office was missing. He could not get in. Timmy was already there. Timmy entered through a side door and opened the front door from inside. This was not normal. Stevie had never seen Timmy enter that way. Stevie also noticed a puddle of blood in front of the building. Timmy kicked dirt over the puddle. Inside, Timmy went ahead to the changing area. By the time Stevie got there, Timmy was already running the washing machine. Stevie had never seen Timmy run the washing machine before. Timmy began wiping blood off the floor with a rag. Stevie asked what happened. Timmy said his father-in-law had been shot. Timmy did not say he did it. Stevie also saw a bloody mop outside. Normally there was no animal blood in the office because hogs were not killed at that location. Later that day, Sergeant Lynn returned to the farm. He looked around carefully. He saw what looked like blood outside the farm office. He found a .22 caliber shell casing nearby. Inside the building, he saw blood spatters on the walls and floors. He found a jumpsuit with blood stains. He found a bloody mop at the back of the building. In a drawer in the office, he found 2 boxes of .22 caliber bullets and some loose shells. He also found a hole in the window screen of the farm office. Dr. Louis Levy, the medical examiner, later examined John Simmons's body. He found 2 gunshot wounds to the head. One was on the right side of the face. The other was behind the left ear. Both were entrance wounds. That meant the shots came from opposite sides of the head. Dr. Levy testified that this was not consistent with a drive-by shooting. In a drive-by, both shots would come from the same side. He also found bruises and abrasions on Simmons's lips, nose, and forehead. There was a blunt force injury above the right eyebrow. There were abrasions on his left side and hemorrhaging on his buttocks and legs. There was a figure-8-shaped lesion over his left knee. The cause of death was shock from the gunshot wounds. 3 days passed. On July 13, 1990, Lieutenant Jerry Wiggs of the Edgecombe County Sheriff's Department interviewed Timmy at the sheriff's office. Lieutenant Wiggs read Timmy his rights. Timmy waived his rights. He agreed to talk. Then Timmy made a full confession. Lieutenant Wiggs wrote it down. Timmy signed the statement. In that statement, Timmy admitted that he shot John Simmons at the hog farm on July 10, 1990. He said he asked Simmons for a ride to the farm. He said when they arrived, he picked up the farm truck and drove ahead. He went inside the farm building. When Simmons drove up, Timmy fired a shot into Simmons's truck. Simmons got out and said he was hit. Timmy told him to sit in the kitchen area. Then Timmy shot Simmons again because Simmons had a knife and was coming toward him. Simmons fell but got up. Timmy helped him into the truck. Then Timmy drove to get help. He said he threw the rifle into a hog pen. He said he did not know why he shot Simmons the first time. The exact reason for the murder was never made completely clear. Timmy later said he and Simmons had had a fist fight before the shooting. He also said Simmons was a wife beater, but that was not proven. The victim, John Simmons, was 42 years old. He was Timmy's father-in-law. He was shot with a .22 caliber rifle. He was killed at the hog farm where Timmy worked. Timmy used lies about a drive-by shooting to try to cover up what he did. He tried to clean the crime scene. He hid the weapon, but the physical evidence did not match his lies. After Timmy Keel signed his confession on July 13, 1990, the police arrested him. He was charged with first-degree murder for the death of John Simmons. He was held in jail while the case moved forward. The first trial began on August 12, 1991. The trial took place in Edgecombe County Superior Court. Judge Frank R. Brown presided. The jury heard the evidence. They found Timmy Keel guilty of first-degree murder. The same jury then decided the sentence. They recommended the death penalty. The judge sentenced Keel to death on that date. However, Keel's lawyers appealed. The case went to the North Carolina Supreme Court. In 1992, that court made a decision. The court found that the trial judge had given a wrong instruction to the jury. The instruction was about what intentionally killed meant. The court said this error violated due process. That means the trial was not fair. So the North Carolina Supreme Court reversed the conviction. They ordered a new trial. Keel was not freed. He stayed in jail waiting for the second trial. The second trial began on March 5, 1993. It was again in Edgecombe County Superior Court. Judge Brown also presided this time. The prosecution presented their evidence again. They showed that Keel had lied about the drive-by shooting. They presented the confession. They also presented physical evidence from the farm. The defense did not argue that Keel was innocent. Instead, they introduced evidence that Keel had been drinking and using cocaine that night. They also showed that Simmons had a knife and that the two men had fought. Keel testified that he did not mean to kill Simmons. The jury found Keel guilty of first-degree murder. Then the sentencing phase began. The prosecution needed to prove an aggravating factor to justify the death penalty. They introduced a certified record of Keel's 1987 conviction for involuntary manslaughter in the death of his infant son. Under North Carolina law, a prior felony conviction involving violence to a person is a statutory aggravating factor. The jury found that this factor existed. The defense presented mitigating evidence. They called witnesses. Keel's parents and brother testified. A pastor testified that Keel had accepted religion. A supervisor said Keel was a good worker. Dr. Robert Condor, a neuropsychologist, testified that Keel's IQ was 78. He said this was in the borderline range between low average IQ and mild mental retardation. Dr. Jonathan Weiner, a forensic psychiatrist, diagnosed Keel with alcohol and drug dependence and borderline personality disorder. He said Keel had problems controlling impulses. The jury found 8 mitigating circumstances, but they still recommended the death penalty. On March 30, 1993, the judge sentenced Keel to death. Keel appealed again. The North Carolina Supreme Court heard the case. In 1994, they affirmed the conviction and sentence. They found no errors. Keel then filed a petition to the United States Supreme Court. On February 27, 1995, the U.S. Supreme Court denied the petition. Keel's direct appeals were over. After that, Keel tried to get post-conviction relief, but his lawyer missed a deadline. The lawyer did not file for state post-conviction review within 60 days as required. Because of this mistake, many of Keel's claims were procedurally barred. That meant the courts would not hear them because they were filed too late. Keel filed a petition for habeas corpus in federal court. The U.S. Court of Appeals for the Fourth Circuit heard the case. On December 7, 1998, they affirmed the dismissal of his petition. They ruled that his arguments lacked merit. The state scheduled Keel's execution for August 6, 1999. Witnesses were selected. But on July 30, 1999, the North Carolina Supreme Court issued a stay. They stopped the execution. They later set a new date for October 29, 1999. Then on September 29, 1999, the court issued another stay. Both stays were based on concerns about Keel's mental capability. Keel's lawyers continued to fight. They argued that Keel was mentally retarded. North Carolina law at that time did not allow the execution of mentally retarded people. The defense said an expert measured Keel's IQ at 70, which was the cutoff for retardation. The prosecution said Keel's IQ was 87. The courts found that Keel was not retarded. He had earned his GED in prison. He took religion courses. He functioned normally in prison. In 2003, the state set a new execution date. It was November 7, 2003. Keel's lawyers made one last effort. They claimed that in the 1987 involuntary manslaughter trial for his son's death, an alternate juror had participated in deliberations. That would be illegal. An alternate juror is not supposed to be in the jury room or discuss the case. The defense got a sworn statement from an alternate juror saying he had been in the room and offered his views. The prosecution got affidavits from 4 regular jurors who said this did not happen. The courts rejected the claim. The alternate juror later testified that he never took part in regular deliberations. Keel's lawyers also asked Governor Mike Easley for clemency. They argued that Keel had the mental ability of a 5th grader. On November 6, 2003, Governor Easley denied clemency. He said in a statement, "Having carefully reviewed the clemency petition, I find no compelling reasons to invalidate the sentence recommended by 2 juries and affirmed by the courts." The U.S. Supreme Court also turned down the last appeal that same week. On the night of November 6, 2003, Keel was moved to the Death Watch area at Central Prison in Raleigh. He had a last meal. He asked for fried chicken, a biscuit, rice, a Diet Coke, and a T-bone steak without the bone with mushrooms and onions. His family visited him from 10 a.m. until 11 p.m. He asked them not to witness his execution. Keel did not make a final statement. At 2 a.m. on November 7, 2003, prison medical workers began administering the lethal injection drugs. Keel was pronounced dead at 2:18 a.m. He was 39 years old. He was the 5th person executed in North Carolina in 2003. He was the 880th person executed in the United States since 1976. After the execution, Keel's body was cremated as he had requested. His family held a private funeral. His son, who was born after the murder, grew up visiting his father in prison. The family of John Simmons did not speak to reporters after the execution. A local newspaper wrote that justice was served. Joseph Timothy Keel died by lethal injection on November 7, 2003, and the case of John Simmons's murder was closed.